People can hear okay?
Help me to walk alone ahead.
We're waiting for a couple more people.
I will feel no love. Oh, my mind, reassure me I don't need no one. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holding by my own.
Welcome.
I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holding by my own. Yeah, the bad days may come, the lover may leave, the winter may not. Hey, the map of your palm, the tempo you beat, you're all that you got.
Mira, you let me know when we're ready to start.
Yeah, I think we're ready. Welcome, everyone. I do want to let everyone know that we are recording. So if you want to not be on record, whatever, feel free to take your screen down. But just wanted to let you know that we are recording so people can view this in perpetuity. And I'll hand it over to our presenters. Thank you so much.
Hi. Y'all can hear me okay? Right on, right on. Hi, I'm Scout. I use they, them pronouns, and I work at Chicago Women's Health Center along with...
And I'm muted. I'm Diane. Hi.
We're really glad to be here today to talk about feminist health education and essentially to get a very in-depth conversation just started. So it's good to see y'all. Diane's going to put a prompt into the chat box as we move to the next slide. To start, just a brief introduction, putting your name, pronouns, if you like, what year you're in, and then y'all, this is a tool that is new that we learned about. I recently learned about called the mood meter. Anyone heard of this before or used it before? No? Okay. Whoa. This is meant to be gauging where we're at in terms of energy and in terms of like positivity, pleasantness. And so really it's an invitation without judgment to just name like, all right now, because I'm really excited to be here, I'm feeling nervous. I'm like darker orange. So you can put into the chat box your name, again, pronouns if you like. I would love to hear what year you are at school, and then the mood meter term or color. I'm not in school, but so I didn't put it. Feel free to add whatever you want to get a sense of who's in the room. No pressure, y'all. I really like this tool because it's a way for folks to gauge where they're at and also know that there are really subtle shifts, and a tool for us to use like also throughout our days to notice like, actually am I always red in the morning because I hate the morning, or am I always red in the afternoon because like, 3 p.m. I want to nap, I don't want to be in class. So we're glad you're here today. We got some yellows, some light orange, bright yellow, right on, more yellows. Good to see y'all here. As folks can feel free to like add in some greens too. I also would invite you to like notice throughout our time today, like how does your mood shift? So you can like screenshot this, whatever you like. Think about it. There's also a link noted. Feel free to check in about it throughout the rest of the day. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the history of Chicago Women's Health Center. So CWHC, can I just see with like a thumbs up reaction and or type into the chat, have you heard of Chicago Women's Health Center before? Anyone? No pressure. We're located in Uptown. It's lovely to be here with y'all. We've had, nice Lindsay, we've had some folks who have been actually students at the Loyola School of Social Work and in the Gender and Women's Studies program who have been at the Health Center as interns or staff people. And we, in general, were born out of a feminist health movement, which essentially was in response to patriarchal, racist, homophobic practices, ableist and sizist practices and relationships to medical care and health information. There were a wave of grassroots organizations led by folks who are directly challenging those power imbalances. So while in the city of Chicago, there were many organizations, a core one, if you move to the next slide, was the Jane Abortion Network. Have folks heard of the Jane Abortion Network? I totally recommend checking out the Jane Abortion Network resources online. There's a book about the Jane Abortion Network. There's been some movies about the Jane Abortion Network, Jane, an Abortion Story. Essentially, the Jane Abortion Network was an organization, a grassroots organizing effort to link people with access to abortion care that was rooted in dignity and access. So y'all, Jane worked from 1969 to 1973. Was abortion legal then? Does anyone know? No, right on. Sky, Natalie, very clearly no. I don't know, there's like no thumbs down emoji, is there? No, okay, cool. So at that point, abortion was not legal. It was in 1973 that a historic court case, Supreme Court case, was decided upon. But I saw you mouth it, Sky. What is that? Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade, right on. So Roe v. Wade actually provided access to abortion, or affirmed that there would be access to abortion that would not be illegal, that it was federally not deemed illegal. Doesn't necessarily mean there was a lot of support for it. But before then, there were a whole host of underground organizations starting to acknowledge that access to healthcare, specifically abortion care, is about access to power and access to resources for living one's own life. And doing so includes making informed decisions about one's own healthcare and about one's own healthcare options. So the Jane Abortion Network, in the course of 4 years, provided roughly 12,000 abortions. What was a clear expression of need that directly was in conflict with what legally was affirmed as needed or supported or valued. We were born out of that movement, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit more about the Health Center. As a feminist health organization with its roots in critical feminist education and healthcare, we consistently try to challenge power imbalances throughout any healthcare experience. So if you click again, you'll see a whole list of the different types of care that we provide. Diane and I are involved in the outreach and education program, and today what we're going to focus on is, what does feminist health look like? What does feminist health education look like? And how does it actually start with us? Because when we think about the history of the feminist health movement, it was all about grassroots organizing, people coming together in their own communities to challenge power dynamics that they were feeling in their own lives and in their own relationships. So let's go to the next slide, y'all. I want to define comprehensive sex ed. So y'all, how many of you had sex ed in your high school and or previous to this year? You can do emojis up. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Guy. Sophie had some. Lindsay had some. Madeline, right on. I did not have sex ed. Diane, did you have sex ed? I just didn't have it, y'all. I didn't have it at my school. I went to a small Jewish day school, and it was not a part of the curriculum. And so when we think about comprehensive sex ed, it's important to note that comprehensive sex ed has a variety of components to it, and it is fairly progressive and upheld by Chicago public schools, but it requires actually folks having access, period, to sex ed. So today when we talk, let's click one more time, because I actually want us to think about how you would describe, I want us to think about how you would describe your sex ed or even health education. So I'm gonna ask y'all to go to menti.com, and Diane just put some more information about it. And there's gonna be a link that you can use to enter in your own healthcare experiences. And really, we're asking y'all to, you shall be able to see my screen, y'all can see the question on the board? We want to hear from you. how would you describe your sex ed? Like, in general, what would you use? What words would you use? You should be able to type into that website using the code some description about your sex ed. So I'm going to go on my phone while we do it, and I'm going to share some of mine. Let's just take a minute, and we should be able to see live images pop up. No pressure, it will be anonymous. Only talked about abstinence, the high school, Catholic school rather. Thank you. Heteronormative. So the approach of this person who delivered sex ed was impactful. It was care focused, right on. So again, another Catholic-based abstinence only, learning about certain bodies, men's reproductive health, or certain gender identities. Honestly, not great. Mainly only abstinence, clinical, non-existent. So learning from friends, yeah, right on, y'all. Feel free to keep adding. I like this notion of clinical. I mean, if folks want to add more specific details in the chat box or to unmute to share, they definitely can. Very professional, right on. Your mom was there, so potentially parents and young people were doing it together, right on. Straightforward, direct, so in some ways this can be really helpful. Focused on abstinence, right, and purity. That's a pretty big deal. So different messages depending upon identities, celebration versus virginity approached in different ways for different folks, right on. Okay, so we get a reiteration of very heteronormative, focusing on certain types of relationships. Learning wrong information, misinformation, that's a big deal. And not sex ed at all, in particular having a session in PE, but again, it was not necessarily a lot of designated time for sex ed. And we see folks learning again from their friends and through the internet, right on. Wow. And so then the separation. Y'all, thank you so much for sharing. I'll let Mira share again the screen because y'all just, wow, articulated a lot of not only distinct or differences in sexual health education, but also noting that it actually can impact the way that we feel about our own bodies, our own lives, and the way that we navigate relationships related to sexual health. That can be not just in terms of partners, but also our own bodies, and also in terms of how we relate to conversations with care providers about sex, asking questions or not. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see this image from the Western State Center. And specifically, this is made available through a website through Forward Together, which is a reproductive justice organization that does a lot of organizing, also including a lot of art around reproductive health and justice. But this image in particular is trying to articulate that there are different levels of society that perpetuate different messages. And when we have certain messages that impact the way that we are supposed to guide our individual actions, they can actually set into practice some cultural norms or beliefs. And those cultural norms or beliefs influence our institutional policies. So think about dress codes. How many of you went to a school with a dress code and or have known someone who has used a dress code before? Yeah? Okay, claps, is that for like affirmation? I don't know. Okay, maybe we like it. No judgment. So y'all, that's an institutional policy that actually involves putting into practice some cultural beliefs. Can anyone give me an example of what a cultural belief might be that is upheld or communicated by that institutional practice of having a dress code? Feel free to unmute or to share. Think about community beliefs or even expectations. If we're told only some people can wear short sleeves or tank tops, what does that actually say about our beliefs with regard to people in our communities?
So at my school, there's only dress codes for girls. So I remember specifically, like, there was this guy who wore these shorts that were so short, like they were shorter than any shorts I own. And you could see everything. And then I got called out on having a tank top because it wasn't like 3 fingers. So that was bad.
So
They
some
were basically saying
differences.
I was more distracting with my not three shoulders tank top than he was with everything exposed.
Thank you for that very like visual explanation. Appreciate it. Very descriptive. When we're talking about those codes, that underlying message that maybe girls are more distracting than boys, which also completely erases gender expansive folks too, right? And puts certain restrictions on certain types of people based on gender that they are raised in or assigned, and also that notion that certain people's behavior is restricted while others is not. So that also impacts individually, that individual cog, the way that we feel about ourselves, the way that we actually get dressed in the morning, decisions that are available or not to us. So throughout today, we're going to be thinking along this line, because if we can actually view ourselves, each and every one of us, as health educators, we have the capacity to push back against some of those cultural messages that form institutional practices and are sustained through networks that are not feminist, that actually are not upholding practices of self-determination and justice, which are the practices that we uphold at Chicago Women's Health Center and the values that we hold to be central to our work. So y'all, let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Mira, to talk a little bit about those feminist principles. If you click one more time, this is a list of essentially everything we want to take into consideration when we are teaching a class. And I'm going to read through these pretty quickly because I want us to actually implement these when we have our small group discussions or sort of put them into practice. We want to actively identify and analyze power. So when we're talking about that notion of the different rules for dress codes, who is actually served being able to make choices about their own dress code and who is not? Who gets to determine those and who, that's okay, and who actually does not have power for that. So you can click that one image one more time, which is to say that when we talk about history of feminist health movement, the idea is that if folks see feminism as a way to push back against power dynamics, it is about a redistribution of power in terms of who makes decisions for themselves, who has access to resources to actually make decisions and take care of themselves, their bodies, and their relationships, and also who is spoken about as opposed to speaking for themselves. We also want to use a harm reduction framework. If you click one more time, you'll see an image that shows a notion that no stigma is central to harm reduction, that this is not about blaming folks for making decisions about how they practice safer sex or whether they choose to use certain types of substances or not. It's about supporting people and identifying steps that are accessible for them for decreasing harm. We also want to use sex positivity. And if you click one more time, you'll see this notion of being centered around pleasure, that talking about sex in a feminist way and sexual health is the notion that folks may engage in sexual activity, not just for creating pregnancies. And that the idea behind all folks getting access to their bodies and exploring what feels good to them and their bodies is a core component of pleasure-centric, sex-positive, and affirming sex ed. Next, if you click, you'll see an image that affirms that all genders and all sexualities deserve time, attention, and resources. Instead of having that heteronormative definition of what sex means, which oftentimes is really restricted to two different types of body parts engaging with each other, we are using more expansive definitions. We, if you click again, are also really trying to challenge definitions of what health is. That health, those health barometers are oftentimes rooted in white supremacist, fatphobic, ableist, and classist definitions of someone's size being an indicator of their health or someone's ability being an indicator of their health, which actually completely negates this notion of there not being any wrong way to be in a body and to have a body. So a little bit later today, we'll talk a little bit about access to resources, noting that our goal for y'all today is to start to think about a holistic approach to sex ed. So if you click to the next slide, when I use the term holistic, I want you to look at all of these lists, this list rather of sessions. How many of you have ever seen or heard rather, let me back up. How many of you see something in here that was missing from your sex ed? And if so, you can put it in the chat box. Yeah, you can also unmute Natalie if you want to share. For example, for me, we talked about anatomy. I didn't consider that to be sex ed. We did not talk about consent. Consent was missing from my conversation about sexual health education. Anyone else? Put into the chat box and or unmute.
I mean, the only thing we talked about in ours were puberty and then reproductive and sexually transmitted diseases. And they weren't very specific as to how you could contract them, just that you could. And like everything else I learned was through like actually like a feminist youth against rape culture club. But that was the only way I learned any of this, besides just this is the male and female anatomy, this is what happens, and that's it.
Thanks for sharing that.
I'll echo that. That's the same with my situation. Yeah, we talked about the anatomy and the physical parts of it, but no other side of it. Nothing about pleasure. Nothing about different sorts of people that exist in the world. It was very much physical, and yeah, the STDs were for some reason like really, really focused on. A lot of photos that I think it was kind of the scare tactic that if we show them these horrible things, then maybe they won't do it. But that's a shitty way of doing things.
I agree. I had the same, but like more with pregnancy. Like they were just like, you can get pregnant, but there wasn't like any like how you could get pregnant. And the same thing with STDs. It was also a lot more like anatomy based and like hygiene. But my sex ed originally came from a Catholic school and that American Girl book that was like Your Body and You. Those are my two resources. So
thanks, y'all. We're also going to have some more time to debrief in small groups because I want to make sure folks have like a lot of time to talk through this. One piece I want you to think about here is if you all, like looking back at that write-in that we had, if you all feel that a lot of the focus of sex ed was about STI or how to not get pregnant or body parts, those focus areas can sometimes convey messages about what it is people might want us to do with our decisions, our bodies, and our relationships. So someone shared, and I think it was Natalie who shared the term like fear-based, this notion that potentially folks who are teaching sex ed in a way that isn't overtly feminist might actually be conveying some messages about what we should or shouldn't be focusing on. So while we'll debrief that a little bit later, I want you to keep that in mind. You can click one more time, Mira, to show that actually when we're talking about this entire, click a couple more times, this entire list of perfect lessons or subjects actually span more than just the physicality or the physical nature of STIs, that actually it includes emotional and social dynamics. What does it mean socially to actually have a conversation about having an STI and potentially talking with a partner about safer sex practices? How does that impact you emotionally? How does it impact you to hear if a partner has experienced sexual harm? That has to do with sexual health and isn't necessarily about one's physical health, as it could actually be about emotional and mental and social itself as well, social health as well. So let's move to the next slide, because what I want us to think through, and you can click a couple more times, Mira, I want us to consider that we are getting messages all the time. And these messages can come from people overtly saying, you must use this particular tool to make sure you don't smell, which may give a message that bodies are smelly. Certain people should cover certain types of their body parts, which may give messages about certain body parts are shameful or should not be seen in public, or even things like certain people should have certain relationships and other people can't have them. These messages come from lots of different places, and they impact the way that we think and feel and act. So today, what I want you to be thinking about, and we're going to break into small groups, is clicking to the next slide. We want you to break out into small groups, clicking one more time to think about a couple of different questions. What are some of the messages you've received and are currently getting?